So, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to our panel discussion on AI and platforms. And as you will hear over the next hour, this will possibly become a discussion about AI and work platforms, because we have here 4 representatives of the different stakeholders of labor platforms. And I start with Shaun, who has been a worker for 2 different platforms, if I got this correctly, Toys Besorgt, Uber Eats, and later on Gorillas. Rani, a representative of the International Labour Organization, researching labor platforms. Axel Dekker, you are a founder of a work platform called Packly, also active in the delivery sector. And Wendy, the CEO of Zurich Insurance, for the section of benefits, offering benefits to workers. I'm Andrea Herrmann. I'm a professor of sustainable innovation and entrepreneurship at Radboud University and have the pleasure to guide you through this program. So we will do this along some questions that I will pose, and we will, of course, also open the floor to the audience later on and then ask for your questions. But to start with, we thought it would be interesting if you start with introducing yourselves with a view on how in your work with or on platforms came across algorithms. So what is your experience with AI and particularly algorithms in platforms? Do you want to start?
Sure. So I began in 2020 with a job at Uber Eats, and the platform that was a lot of basically algorithm-based, determining where the orders went and how they proceeded from that. You hardly ever interacted with someone. Then I found work with Gorillas, which was acquired by Cheah, and I spent the start of this year and the end of last year with Toys Besorgt, which also involves a lot of algorithm and AI. So I can bring the workers' perspective on these issues.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I'm a researcher at the research department of the International Labour Organization, and I started working on online labor platforms in 2016. And one of the reasons I was looking at that platform, largely the microtask, was there was a lot of commonality that existed between the nature of work that was being done there and the home-based piece rate workers in the garment industry. And very soon I realized that there are certain things similar, but there are lots of things that are completely different. Because when you look at the garment industry, you have intermediaries there. But here, which are humans, and here you don't have any intermediaries. You have an automated system, which is basically an algorithm, and that algorithm is nothing but a mathematical equation in a way, which is driven by certain data-driven systems. And I realized very quickly that this algorithm is actually then used to allocate work, match the worker with the clients, and then go about following the work processes to the extent of sometimes, disciplining or deactivating workers. So that was my experience with the algorithm in the first place.
Yeah, so my name is Axel. I'm the founder of Packly, and basically we build a platform that doesn't really do what you just explained, because we thought it was very bad. And basically what we try to build is a platform that really helped riders to get more out of all the earnings that came from the parcels that we delivered. Yeah, it's basically a typical startup story. We started on a couch with a couple friends and also a couple riders with a couple beers, and we put it on a whiteboard and said, well, let's go to the Chamber of Commerce tomorrow, and we register a company and we start doing it. Scaled it from 10 delivery drivers to 15,000 across 3 countries. And basically our fundamental difference was there was no algorithms like you just described. It was just first come, first serve. When you had your order, the next person in line would get an order, and if you decline, that's your choice because you're a freelancer and that's your way to go. Yeah, that was a lot tougher than we thought when we were on the couch thinking about building this company.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy. I work for Zurich Insurance. I'm the CEO of Zurich Integrated Benefits. So probably my perspective is a bit different. So we come from insurance background, where my role is to work with our clients, corporates, to provide benefits for their workforce. So historically, this is more in the form of insurance, but looking to really protect the workers, help to support the workers. And as we see the nature of work start to change, that line between traditional workforce and freelancer and gig economy start to merge, we need to figure out how we support the workforce of tomorrow, of the future, or today. And our experience of algorithm is twofold. One is to really understand how different platforms use algorithm, because that goes into how we would understand the different way of work, different ways of reward or assign jobs or whatnot. I would say also our experience of drawing the parallel is algorithm, to what Uma said, is merely using data to drive performance. And that is really similar to some of the roles that we use data in the traditional employer sense, but also how we use data to better understand the needs of the workforce and better protect and build that resilience for the workforce. So those two aspects is what we focus on.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have learned quite something about AI in general and what AI can do for us, and we have debated over the past 2 days that there are positive outcomes, negative outcomes. So what is your experience and how do you see algorithms in work platforms? Are they a good thing? Are they a bad thing? What is good about them? What is bad? Maybe, Axel, if you want to start with your experience on designing them, really?
Yeah, sure. So we do use algorithms. We didn't use them on, for example, punishing somebody when they didn't want to drive a certain route that they simply just didn't like. But we had like algorithms that planned routes and made it more efficient for a driver to go from A to B and to C. But what we try to really differentiate, and also something that we discussed previously, is there's big differences between like algorithms in the benefit of a company to get more earnings and to get better results, bottom line on their P&L, or also help with efficiency for drivers. I've seen a lot of different algorithms. We also tried a lot of like user-friendly algorithms, but in the end you always saw that if you start manipulating certain things to make it better for a certain side, there's always a disadvantage on the other side for example, drivers. So yeah, that was a little bit of our experience building it from scratch towards something that actually could really benefit riders. And I think that you have a lot of experience of how like a job can pop up on your screen and you can think, oh, this is a good earning. You, for some reason, decline it, and later it comes back with either a bonus or it comes back with less earnings because there's just changes in the algorithmic results.
It does seem sometimes arbitrary with the amounts you'll get for the distances you'll ride, and it can depend on how busy it is in a day, especially with Uber Eats, or how far you tend to go. My largest payment that I ever got seemed very arbitrary. I was just driving an okay distance with an okay amount of food, but the payment was much more than I'd seen before. So there are certainly levers being pulled behind the scenes that you're not really aware of as a worker, and they can really reward you, or maybe you go a really far distance with a lot of food, and the reward is mediocre, perhaps. So yeah, there is a level of opaqueness that you don't really notice from the algorithm. But at my other work, as you mentioned, designing the rides of the algorithms to match it, I got to see that in progress over time as the company matured and the algorithm for finding people was first implemented. Initially, it was worse than just having someone sitting in a chair saying that, okay, these look close, we'll send them there. And as they got to know the city, that got better. Then when the algorithm came in, there was a noticeable dip as the machine started to figure out, okay, what do these routes work? If it's just 20 meters away, but there's a train track there, it doesn't register it at first. But then over time, it became better and better. So from both ends, you can see that there is the rewards you get on your question was, yeah, from the worker side, it does seem a bit opaque, but also the algorithms, as time goes on, as they get to learn, you do see an improvement in the areas where they are implemented.
Thank you. Uma, do you want to follow up? Have you seen in your research good algorithms and bad algorithms? Can you distinguish between them?
Yes, I think the algorithm per se, if rightly used for the right purposes, I think it can be a very good thing. Like if you're talking about any platform, if you're using it to match between a worker and a client, I think that's not a bad idea, but then you still need to have, like you very rightly said, some transparency with regard to how is this matching process being done. You know, if you are, a very simple thing is, if one is looking for a car, basically, to ride from A to B, then how does that algorithm decide if there are about 5 drivers around that same area, which one to give? So I think that becomes a very critical issue there as to what is the basis on which that decision is being made. So for me, if there is an openness there and a transparency, I think that would be very good to know. But where it becomes very problematic is when you start linking up with a whole lot of indicators, which are basically the performance indicators, which goes into the decision about the allocation of work. That's where an algorithm becomes quite problematic, because how are you deciding those indicators? What are the basis for it? And also, there is a pressure that is built upon. I would have expected you to come up with something like that, because your performance is based on how faster you deliver. And your algorithm automatically starts working around it, because that's a parameter that you take. And I think when you get into those issues, this is where, to me, an algorithm should not be used, because there's a penalization that is happening for the worker per se. Again, another area where it's problematic is, you know, all platforms per se, they talk about flexibility. A flexibility would mean I can say no to a job. That's true that many of the workers can say a no, and they do say a no. But what is never followed up, and that's something we have consistently seen in our research, is that there is repercussions as a result of it. And that repercussion could be that you might not get any access to work for half a day. You might be partially deactivated or completely deactivated, or you might get jobs which do not pay very well or mediocrely paid. So, you know, what is the cost of that flexibility? And that's again the algorithm that plays around it. And finally, I think the most problematic thing about this whole automated decision-making process is deactivation, which in traditional employment contract is equal to dismissals. Because you're being dismissed without having recourse to why you're being dismissed, right? You have absolutely no human with whom you can communicate and go about finding out what actually went wrong. And it could be a number of things, including a client who got irritated with you and went and made a complaint to the platform. But you don't know as a worker what has happened. So for me, these are some of the things where I feel there should be limits to a use of algorithm and algorithmic management practices in a way.
And it's super interesting what you're saying. I'll come to you in a minute, because yesterday I had the privilege to talk with a representative of a labor platform. And what I learned is that indeed algorithms are trained to take into account previous performance, which means that the best are getting ever better or more gigs and better rated gigs. And the less good ones get ever worse, so to say. Just as an observation, Wendy, you also wanted to come in.
Yes, probably a bit of different perspective, but to really add on what Uma shared. I think algorithm as a technology, the concept, I think, is just using data to drive certain decision making. That concept itself is good, it's helpful. But I think as some of my fellow panelists has shared, it depends on what you use it for. So if I draw links to traditional employment contract, when you use data to make decisions, it should not just be about disciplinary. It should be more focused on training and development. And that's where a lot of power can come in. So if using data, using algorithm is telling us certain improvements, certain efficiency can be driven out of it, and I agree, should have transparency. And that could be a really powerful, and I may even argue, a benefit to the workers, to the drivers. But if there's no no transparency, and it's really just about averaging down, so the worst performers getting worse and the better one getting better, then you're not driving actually as a whole a more productive platform as a result. So I would argue that the concept, if it's used in more about improvement, development, and how to give support to help people get better, whether it's from training development, from benefits perspective, from that support perspective, then it would be much more powerful and useful.
Yeah, I have a question to you, Wendy, as you are with the Zurich Insurance in a way. So how does this entire algorithm play around when you're trying to give these health insurance packages? Because platforms using the algorithms are pushing the workers. So, workers are taking a huge risk, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's also violation of traffic lights and all of that. So there's a huge risk element of safety that is there. And this is something that we have repeatedly seen in our surveys, especially in a number of sectors. So when you're thinking about insurance, providing insurance for these workers, what is the interplay that is there between your thoughts on the way the algorithms are being used and also your negotiations with the platform in a way?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very good question. And I would like to first caveat by saying that everything I talk about doesn't mean we're doing it already. But what we're doing is we're looking into this area to say how we can innovate. So 2 fronts I would address. One is when we work with certain platforms, we know that they also use tiering system where they assign a certain category to the different drivers. And there has been discussion about can we integrate with those data or those categorization to design benefit package. So if there are certain behavior or certain allocation of the categories of different drivers or freelancers, maybe what the platform wants to do is give access to better benefits package. And that's something that could be very powerful, going back to now using algorithm just for the disciplinary, but actually rewarding people. So tier up in the sense you get them better benefits, better value. The second part, which was very interesting, is the ecosystem angle, is how we link into that data. Obviously, different geography, different jurisdiction have different consideration, but the power is exactly there. Uma, you mentioned if there's data about how one drives behavior. Of course, if I'm coming from insurance perspective, probably a lot of the audience will get nervous to say, do I price that into your insurance premium? But we're thinking about it a bit differently, is how can we give the support, the service, to prevent bad things from happening? And that is the area we at insurance is realizing that and again, probably because I'm focusing more from a benefits angle, how we can help people get better, how we can help everyone thrive as an economy. So really for us, we don't see our role as there to price the claims and just to pay out when something bad happens. We think we can only be different if we can actually take those data to prevent bad things from happening, whether it's from driving or if it is other freelancer, for example, the IT side from a cyber perspective. So if we're able to build that ecosystem in link on the data, we can then have the preventive services to build that resilience. As companies, we talk a lot about resilience services to help companies become more resilient to the bad things happening in the future. What we now want to move into is helping individuals to become more resilient as a benefit that we provide. And we can only do that if we get to the data integration, if we get to the individual level. So the benefit as we see in the past, the one size fits all is just an insurance premium, company pay and we pay out when bad things happen, will not work in the future. Because what we need to get to is how to help every one of you and every one of us to prevent the risk, to prevent the bad things from happening.
Is this something that you see in your all-day work, Axel? Is this how you think about your algorithms? Kind of.
Yeah, so we were talking a bit about like what happens when an algorithm decides that you go lower in the ranks and you get punished basically for saying no, which is, we think that it's your good right as you're a freelancer. You can just say no to a gig because you're an independent worker. But what we really noticed is, on the other side, what happened when we didn't have an algorithm that was helping us to make things smarter, was that if you, in the end of the day, run into orders being left that were not being delivered. So one thing we did really different is we didn't do food, but we did parcels. So parcels were already packed and ready to be shipped. And what we saw, because we were not really making use of like the fastest riders always being rewarded as much as possible, we saw sometimes that we had parcels left at the end of the day, which creates in the back office a total different dynamic of stress of a customer, on the other hand, going to reach out, going to say, hey, where's my parcel coming? So I think there could be a big benefit to a good algorithm that helps put the good people that are driving faster like on top of the line. But I think that if you then at some point by an algorithm go lower into that rank, it is so hard to climb back to the top and to be able to be in the top tier of people that are constantly getting the best deliveries. So we saw a huge struggle into getting everything out, especially when we were scaling during like Black Friday and Christmas. Some of these stores and COVID doing ship from store deliveries was insane to keep up the demand. But what we really noticed is riders kept signing up for our platform for two reasons. Was one, we did parcels and not restaurant orders, and restaurants always tell you that the food is ready, but the food isn't ready. They just want you to wait there because then they know for sure somebody is there. And then when you cancel, you get punished. So you're not going to cancel because otherwise you go back to the lower side of the rank. And people knew that on the other side, there was actual humans talking to these riders saying like, hey, we have like 5 deliveries in this corner and we think we can make like a good route. And one thing we noticed is these riders know how to combine platforms. Uber, Deliveroo, Packly, like all these platforms, they knew how to play this game if you get used to it. And I think that the best way for a rider that is a little bit more lower in terms of efficiency should be taught by the other riders how to get better at delivering their parcels or their deliveries.
So how did you deal at the company level with these less good jobs, if you want to? Because if there are parcels left, it seems that this is a ride no one wanted to take. And you said you had not matched explicitly matched good riders or bad riders to specific jobs. So how did you deal with this dilemma of giving better jobs to some and less good jobs to other riders?
Yeah, we actually had just very good support people that knew who were good riders and who were a little bit less riders. And then we had a group of riders that did more of the, not really call them like shitty rides, but like the outskirts and the ones that we knew were, we could just see on a map in this side of the area, we're going to have a problem tonight. And then we tried to plan ahead for that. And at some point we developed a system that could flag these things from coming like later because we gathered more data. But that was just constantly a big struggle. But I think if you look at the big platforms that have algorithms, they also struggle with these things. It's not that, it's still a physical delivery from A to B that you need to get through. And I think that you probably know best, like you know where you want to drive towards and you know the outskirts of a city where you're like, that's going to give me struggles because I have to get back to this area and then I can get the good orders again. Like it's a way of working you have to get used to, and at some point you figure out how to play it. But yeah, we, as you said in the beginning, we also saw some riders that were earning like really good money on the platform and some that just had a real struggle to get a hold on like how this worked.
There are always better and worse parts of town, traffic conditions, nicer roads and things. So you do get a preference to, when you see a certain address come up, you feel, this is great, I would love to do this one. But speaking of the good riders getting better and bad ones getting worse, there were always theories when we were waiting for the next order to come through. Some people would seem to come in, get an order, and go out again, while some people were stuck waiting. So there was a thought that the most efficient riders are getting more orders because the platform knows that these will get delivered the fastest, whereas the slower people, the people who are not delivering so much in time, are being held back unless there's no other option, which was interesting on a salaried position, because when we were all earning the same per hour, it just meant the best workers had to work harder, and the workers who were not as efficient got to work less, which did feel a bit unfair for the people who were always on the rides. And speaking of safety, there was also an issue initially where the incentives for doing a lot of deliveries in a small amount of time, and these bonuses had to be removed because it was, I think, discovered that it would have been unwise to encourage speed in that manner, or perhaps even illegal from a safety perspective. And so some riders were disappointed that those who had done a lot of work, but in the end it is a safety concern. So there's a lot of considerations when when you have these jobs to do.
I just have a question to you, Axel. Somewhere down the line, even though you say that you don't have an algorithm, but correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to be saying speed is very important. And I think that's something that I'm contesting with this entire algorithm. I think my question to also Wendy was around that, because I think there is a speed in which you can deliver, and what the algorithm does and what is being promoted or trying to get the consumers to have, accept some of these platforms is that the delivery will be done in 15 minutes, in 30 minutes. Sometimes it's unreasonable, right? You can't deliver in that 15 minutes something that would take 30 minutes. So you're pushing the driver onto that. And then you come back saying, okay, there are some who deliver fast, there's good, there's speedy, because then, we are putting those adjectives to it. So I'm just wondering, after hearing that, to what extent is without algorithms also in some sense driven by the speed? And the second question to you is also, how many employees do you have? And how does it work? I think that would be also very important in a way to look at it.
Yeah, so I think that can basically kind of combine both questions. So with food delivery, you see there's hot food that needs to go to somebody because it's going to get cold. And that's a total different thing than compared to what we were doing with parcels. So we saw in the beginning we were doing 60-minute deliveries. So before the whole Gorilla and Flink stuff was really getting out, we did 60-minute deliveries for Decathlon. And we figured out that nobody wanted their sports gear within 60 minutes. So we had this very expensive thing in the checkout. People pay 15 euros for it, and then this is going to work. We were so convinced to it. And the first order came in 4 days of silence. And then the second order came in. And there were people that were doing it, but it was I forgot my football shorts for my kid, and I need very quickly new ones. But it was really incidental. So we adjusted our system, and we basically made a system between 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the evening. We bundle everything together. So we go to the shop of Decathlon, for example. We pick up 10 orders, and we put them in the most efficient route from stop 1 to stop 10. Riders would get a bulk payment, so they would put 10 things in their backpack. There was a whole algorithm calculating, does it fit the backpack? Which is a total different discussion that we shouldn't get into because it's quite difficult and a big struggle when it's not as big as people say that the parcel is going to be. But basically we bundled between 4 and we bundled between 9, and then we made a route that was also calculating in speed. And I think that one thing that we noticed very quickly is if you push people to deliver between 4 and 5 within an hour, 2 or 3 parcels, you're going to force traffic issues. You're going to force people to have to go from A to B way too fast, if you'd ask me. So we took that whole thing out. We didn't offer that anymore, and we went to a ride of 10 stops in total. And that also attracted new drivers because you could just deliver 10 parcels, earn 40 euros in 60 minutes of driving or an hour and a half of driving, and had quite good earnings in that model. So we weren't really focused that much anymore on speed, but if I remember my delivery this week actually for some food, it was way too fast, and I think the guy was not waiting at certain traffic lights to meet the demand of how fast my delivery was going to come because it was late. And I think that then there's really pushing towards how do you get this parcel from A to B as fast as possible. And to answer your question on the amount of workers, at some point we had 15,000 riders signed up to the platform, and we saw on average 100 to 200 people on a night driving in Amsterdam. And then with scale of the city, it went down to, I think, 40 to 50 riders on an evening average driving around.
Thank you very much. I have a follow-up question to what you previously said, Wendy, with regard to the platform giving you the data for riders so that you can best calculate what kind of benefits you can offer and how. Would this not also lead to different risk premia depending on their situation, be it situation at work, but also at home? So is it not necessary and also enshrined to how insurances work, that some get insurances at a cheaper rate and others at a higher rate? And is there some sort of unequal treatment that is basically necessary for insurance to also do their jobs?
So it depends on what insurance we're talking about, and that is also probably where we would say that as an industry, it's not just up to the insurer or the platform, but also regulator to work together to push some changes. Very common, especially if we're talking about drivers and delivery platforms, accident and health is a policy that typically is where you start, because that's is probably the most important one. What we aim to do is do that as a group-priced policy, so it's not using individual data to really anti-select the individual. What I was getting at is, which is also where we are trying to move away just from the insurance premium. Imagine premium is as a group of all your drivers. What we're saying is, actually, if we get the data, we can actually try to help the platform and the drivers on the platform to get safer. So then together, not only the total premium comes down, but it's about the good of everyone.
How would this be safer look like? Can you elaborate a bit on what you make safer?
To give an example, if we have certain data that earlier was talked about, people driving too fast, running red lights, etc., these could allow us to come up with advisory to say we will promote, going back to probably the earlier point made about algorithm, shouldn't just be punishment. So if we have this insight, we can actually use algorithm to remind people not to do certain things, or give advice to Axel and the founders of platforms to say how to actually retweak your algorithm to avoid these things, because maybe you would be getting the driver faster, but if you actually change your algorithm as a result, we could reduce your premium. That's what I was trying to saying as an ecosystem, we actually can also contribute to reward the platforms to say, don't just focus on the speed, focus on the safety, focus on the drivers, because you can benefit from other aspects financially and also better risk exposure, both better just outcome for everyone. I would say another thing about personalization and data. I think the challenge of platforms, and we're talking a lot about drivers, but all the freelancers, is a lot of the support, a lot of the things that typically is provided by your employer doesn't exist. So how can we then work together as an industry to also say, well, if we cannot do it as a group policy, for example, savings, earlier we were chatting about something like the predictability of pay. But as financial service, we can also probably look at what individually can get as a service. And if we look at in our word, affinity, if we look at you as a group, what service we can provide. So we can help you smooth out your income. We can help you actually get protection, even though it's one-on-one, but we look at you as a group. And these are the type of innovation I think this industry should welcome, because again, we're not just looking at efficiencies. We're not just looking at pushing the one KPI using our lingo, right? We can look at how to actually help the industry as a whole get better. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And Shaun, is this something that you have? Do you have benefit or insurance, or would you like to have it?
Well, it varied based on the job. With Uber Eats, it was technically, I was self-employed. I had my own company that I was doing. I think the legal way was that I was doing contracts for Uber Eats. At my other work that I was doing, I was just an employee directly, which was very, very nice to have a boss that I could immediately talk to, which was such a benefit, and to have other workers who I could speak with. It was a lot less alienating than on Uber Eats, where you're kind of your own island and you rarely interact with anyone. And so I do feel that there's a great benefit to having benefits, and so you feel that you're more secure. If something happens, that's all taken care of. Whereas with Uber Eats, it's all in your own hands, and that could cause a lot of trouble. Just one mistake or one injury, and it sets you back very, very far.
So this sounds like a big yes from the part of the driver. So what about you, Axel?
Yeah, so I think that we had a big group of freelance drivers. We pivoted our model a couple years ago to more like I think Uber does it in Germany, where there's more like one organization with riders inside it, and it's like a partner. So we just deliver volume towards these partners. Also because we saw regulations coming quite close to our freelance model. in the Netherlands. But what we did is we send out surveys quite often asking our freelancers, like, hey, we have different options for you. You can be on payroll, you can be a freelancer, you can have different structures of working for us. And the majority of them said, I want to stay independent, I want to have a freelance solution. And then we did have benefits like you are offering, but we noticed that it wasn't used that much because it was also not super clear and like well explained to these drivers, like what could you get out of this and what is the actual benefit I'm getting from it, until you get hit by a car, for example, and your bike is broken. Then you'd love to have an insurance that helps you. So
and possibly because most of these workers do it part-time, so they may well be insured still through another job. But if we think that this industry, like gig work, is growing, then the number of people who do both, being employed and do it as a side job, or employed through their husband or other situations because they're students or pensioner, then that this will certainly change. Yeah. I must say I really enjoyed the discussion, but I also have the impression that the audience may want to ask questions. So I think this might be a good moment to open the floor to the broader audience and just take questions to our expert of AI and platform work. Yes, please. Just shout.
Okay. So obviously we see these kind of algorithms appear in gig platforms and platform work, but we also see algorithms and algorithmic management appear in more traditional sectors of work across the whole economy. Do you think that the kind of individualization shift in benefits and insurance is limited to these kind of big platforms, or will it be a broader trend as the economy as a whole is downsized?
I'm smiling a bit because I see my colleagues really having the big grin on her face, because I promise I didn't plant you there. So we actually exactly see that. And earlier, I think, Andrea, you made a comment about people having both a traditional job and on the side have a job. This is the reason why actually we saw as an industry, it's actually a matter for us not just to say, oh, what is the future? If we don't actually have a solution, we know traditionally we work with the corporate. That part is also going to shrink, right? Because if you look at the economy, there's going to people earning income, even if they still have a traditional job, part of their income is going to come from the freelancer job. So we partnered with an organization called Future Laboratory to look into this, what we call future of benefits. So, and there were 5 pillars of the theme of what we anticipate the benefits of 2030 needs to look like. And number 1 is personalization. So personalization is twofold. Number 1 is flexibility. So whether you work for a traditional employer like Zurich or you're a freelancer, everyone nowadays more and more want to say, I want a benefit that fits my needs, not one size fits all. And so that personalization, that choice, flexibility is very important, but also personalized experience, because a lot of times when you enter a workforce, or even when we talk about platforms, when we purchase or sell insurance, everyone gets the same. But how do you actually have that experience to say, sometimes maybe this is more important, but as my life stage changes, something else maybe become more relevant. So personalization, I don't want to take up all the time. Number 2 is empowerment, so allow people to make that choice. And I would say the third is technology. So we cannot do this if there is no technology such as data, AI, algorithm. And then there's also well-being. So when we say well-being, we're talking about holistic. So not just pay the claims when something bad happens, but also preventing, giving the support, all of these holistic financial well-being in addition to just physical and maybe mental and social well-being, especially as you think about how gig economy changes the way we interact with each other. And last but not least, impact. I think job is nowadays becoming more and more important, how one defines themselves. So all of these are the 5 pillars of not just gig economy, but how we define the future of benefits, because the future of work is changing.
Thank you. More questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Yes, I want to make a manifestation as well as question.
You need to shout.
Yes, I want to make a manifestation as well as a question with the panelists. So I really believe that the algorithm are not neutral. Okay, so we think about regression. Yes, they're neutral, but if you start training, calculating
Thank you. Who wants to start? Axel, I already.
Yeah, so I think we have a very pragmatic example. We had a support page which says how much do I earn, and it just was there, and you could just see and how does the system calculate delivery on the cents. So if you had a certain distance, you get paid for the distance, you get paid for a pickup, and you get paid for the delivery. And if you look in the app, it just told you exactly like, hey, you're doing this amount of kilometers, so you have this earning, and it was just there. We asked so many times to all the other platforms, like, hey, how do you calculate your thing? Because we were just interested in how they would do it and if we could make it smarter. But what really worked for us is we just put it on our support page, and that was super transparent. And then you saw, like, inside the community, inside the WhatsApp group, somebody joined and asked, like, hey, how much can I earn? And then riders were sharing this page. They're like, oh, you can just find it here. Don't worry about it. It's super transparent. But I agree that you can only get towards that point if at some point these platforms are going to be just transparent about it and tell how it works. And we had a rider board inside our company, and it was 5 riders that were every week coming to our office, and we just had like an hour where we just talked about actual experience on the floor and on the work that was being done. And that helped us like win and get more riders and be super transparent towards the whole industry about what we were doing, and just helped us grow, because in the end you can have a parcel going from A to B, but there has to be heavy lifting from A to B. There has to be a delivery done in the end by that rider, and you can force it with all kinds of algorithms to make it more efficient for yourself and for your bottom line, but in the end there needs to be a delivery done. And we made that quite physical in the sense to just put it online and just tell this is what you're going to earn.
Thanks. Uma, you also wanted to reply.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, and I cannot but agree with you that algorithms are not neutral at all. There's no two ways about it. But about the fact of transparency of algorithms, that's one of the biggest issues. Now, the problem is that the source code of the algorithm is actually part of the e-commerce trade treaties. And that's only once that I know in the history that the source code of the algorithm was revealed to a lawyer in the US because of a case, big case that was going on. But other than that, there's no way we can get access to it. What would be very important is because it has an impact on a worker, it would be very important to see how this can come within the labor market and within the labor law issues. As long as it's not part of labor law issues, but part of the trade treaties, it's very, very difficult to intervene. We do have the Spanish case very clearly, where there's been a demand for algorithmic transparency, but even today, if you look at it, we haven't really achieved it. The workers don't have access to it, and even if they do have access to it, the problem is, what are they going to do with the code? Because there's so much of machine learning algorithm that is fed into it that it doesn't resemble the original code, and you can't make, even the computer scientists, the best of it, can't make sense of how that is driven and what is happening. And as Shaun was also saying earlier, you have algorithms, but there's also human intervention that keeps coming in from time to time. So how do you play around? You don't know how this entire aspect is being worked about. But clearly what is very important is to have both the platforms and the workers on the table to have a discussion about the algorithm. That's something that is doable, and that's something, a starting point for a negotiation actually, to get into the insights into this entire issue.
And maybe just to add one thought, what also is a danger is that control mechanisms that in traditional labor markets are taken by the regulator. For example, I give you an example, it's like how to write a recommendation letter. When you're an employee, typically you have rights to a recommendation letter, and this also needs to be written in a certain language. And so there is some sort of public regulation and guidelines on how this has to be done in order to protect the employee. Now in the gig economy or in digital labor markets, this becomes a platform issue because it's the ratings, it's the way in which the review system is built that this review mechanism takes place. So it's taken out of the public control, and we hear from you, Axel, that you are a very responsible platform in this regard, but I think we have also a history of less responsible platforms. Maybe you want to say something on that, Shaun. And I really wonder, also in view of what you just said, Uma, whether this is not also a role for the regulator to some extent to oblige platforms to also make their algorithms either transparent, because not everyone will do, or give guidelines towards how and what they need to take into consideration in the way they're running. So I wonder for myself whether this is not really a role for the regulator here, because not everyone will be responsible as PACLI and sit together with the workers.
Well, with regards to the transparency of the algorithms, it does seem that in some cases that's almost not possible with the way that the algorithms work, in that they feed into themselves and learn to the point where even the guys who designed them cannot see why it's coming to decisions that it's coming to. So that is already a large obstacle towards transparency. But on the other hand, there are places where you can step in to increase the stakes. I was thinking of how in Gorillas, if there were too many orders or something, the managers would start to write or take on the deliveries as well, so that at higher levels in the company, they have a feel for what it's like on the ground. And so there's an interest in making sure that everything is running smoothly, because at some point, if it's the end of the night and the workers want to go home, you are the fellas who are going to have to hop on the bike if it's very rainy. And
CEO of Gorilla starts to deliver.
Yeah, he even did some rides. Yeah, and we often had our managers as supervisors doing rides at Gorillas. It was a pretty neat culture, and it's an idea for, I guess, a ways to have the people who are designing the algorithms or in charge of making those decisions have a feel for how it affects them as well. But with regards to what was the question before the transparency?
Well, I was just thinking the essence is algorithms and the way they're built. So given that it's so important, or it affects fundamentally how workers are matched, how workers are evaluated, the future of work of gig workers depends on algorithms. So this, I think, is what Uma was saying. They need to be transparent in order to make sure that is not a systematic bias or inequality created by algorithms between workers. And so I wonder whether to make this transparent, it's not part of the regulator's role to enforce this to some extent. Because if platforms don't want to disclose it, at the moment they do not need to do it, and then they can really adopt irresponsible business practices. Sometimes not even knowing what they're doing, as you rightly point out.
If I can just take on the regulator question, because as I come from the ILO too, I think it's important. I think the EU directive, in some sense, what's good, okay, it's watered down, everything else taken. I think what was very good about the EU directive was the part on the algorithmic management, which got untouched in the entire process. And I think what it does very clearly, in a way, is talks about the transparency on and use of algorithms in both the monitoring and decision-making process. And it very clearly says that human monitoring and human decision-making is very important. And I think we'll have to see how it will play out, to what extent the platforms, and again, I think what you need to remember is the EU directive only applies to the EU countries, right? So you have a lot of platforms that operate here but are not based here. They all have their offices in San Francisco. How do you apply such a regulation to companies that are not within their hold? So that's one part of the story. The other thing I do want to bring to all of your notice is, the good thing is that the governing body of the ILO, which is a tripartite constituent of employers, workers, and governments, has given the International Labour Conference an opportunity to have a double discussion on decent work in the platform economy. And that discussion will not only touch on algorithmic management on digital labor platforms, but also go beyond what the gentleman here said, what's happening within the traditional or the regular workplaces. Because you have to look at it, because it's spreading quite widely within the traditional workforces, traditional workplaces too. So I think that discussion would be very important for us to see to what extent can we push the transparency point of algorithm and algorithmic management there, and whether that's an opportunity for us to bring the source code of the algorithm out from the e-commerce trade treaties to the labor law. That's going to be a big fight, but I think there's an opportunity, and we'll have to see how it plays.
Thank you so much. In order not to cut too much into your coffee break, we can take one final question from the audience. Yes, please.
I was just wondering if the focus on the algorithm is going to make the biggest difference, or the focus on the KPIs that the algorithm is trying to adapt to. Right? We all know the famous example of Meta trying to optimize for attention and having all these kind of negative consequences, but at the same time, trying to force transparency in the technology might be very, very hard, as you indicated, but that might also be the wrong place to focus. I don't know whether you agree. Maybe we should focus on the outcomes of the algorithm and create more transparency there.
Thank you. Who?
I think it could certainly be beneficial to see what it's targeting and what it's trying to improve. The KPIs are very important, especially for riders. There was a lot of metrics by which you were measured, and it was unfortunate that the algorithm, the selection of the fastest riders to get more rides or the most efficient, does tend to have a snowball effect almost, where you are doing more orders, but if you fall behind or if someone is already at the bottom, it's very difficult to get back to the place where they want to be. And so transparency on the KPIs, I feel, is a pretty important thing to include, but it is something that applies to a lot of jobs in general, and so it's as much as a concern, I think, with gig work as in most places. Yeah.
Then I will take this as a closing statement for this question. Of course, we could go on for a much longer time to talk about AI and platforms. And to conclude this panel, I would like to give each of you the opportunity to maybe have a closing statement on your take on AI and platforms.
I thought that was an excellent question to ask, because that question reminds me of the difference between gig platforms and traditional workforce is really not that far wide. We focus on KPI, we focus on items that goes into whatever algorithm we may not share, but we know what we want to focus on the output. I think that I agree that is probably something that we should look at across workforce and employment rather than gig or non-gig.
Yeah, I think maybe to add is something we haven't really discussed, but on the other side, it's a two-sided marketplace model, where on the one hand there's consumers buying food and they're rating and they're giving good ratings towards Uber or Deliveroo, and it's a huge fight for everybody here to be using this platform, right, and to choose Uber over Deliveroo, for example. And I think that that's something that from our perspective, is a very big element also driving towards what do you do on the other side with the algorithm that impacts drivers, because you want to win this game on the front, and in the back you need to make certain changes to make it more efficient. But yeah, we always been from the start super transparent about how we are building the platform, how we're building our algorithms, and I personally don't really believe in what do you have to hide when you are trying to keep this algorithm inside your code and you don't want to share it. Like, then you must be doing something that maybe when it comes to service, people wouldn't be super happy to see. So I think the whole discussion is great, but in the end, I would just basically force people to just make stuff like this transparent, because in the end, what do you have to lose when you're just being open about how you're building these platforms?
Thank you.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I would say that I would like to emphasize on both the transparency of KPIs, but also insist on looking at the algorithms, because I think we all know the outcomes in a way, based on the kind of research work we have been doing, that these outcomes are not really favorable to the workers. And they have a huge impact on the working conditions of the workers. So I think it's super important for one to look at algorithms and try to see what are the limits of this algorithm and where it could be used and where it should not be used. And clearly, it should not be used for disciplining workers.
Then the final word is to our gig worker, Shaun.
Well, I would just like to say it was a big pleasure to be invited to participate in this panel. I've had a pretty good time representing the voice of the little guys. So, yeah, tip your delivery drivers.
Thank you very much. And I would like to close this then by thanking really the organizers of this conference and, of course, Giovanna, for making this happen, because I think it's very rare that we have the opportunity as scientists and representatives of platforms, workers, and international organizations to meet each other and to have these kind of dialogues, and they seem to be essential for really understanding what's going on and how we can do better in the future. So thanks a lot for this opportunity, and enjoy the rest of the conference.